80 years. That's exactly how long they said the system would hold. Not forever. Not indefinitely. 80 years. The average lifespan of a world order from the moment one empire writes the rules to the moment another tears them up. We are at year 80. Ray Dalio has spent 50 years studying this cycle. He mapped it across every major empire in the last 500 years. The Dutch, the British, the Roman. He predicted the 2008 financial crisis years before the first bank collapsed. He called the dot-com crash. He has been warning about this specific moment, this exact position in the cycle, for over a decade. In February 2026, he stopped warning. He made a public declaration that changes everything. The post-war world order has not started to crack. It has not begun to deteriorate. It is broken down. Past tense, already done. And the 5 forces he has tracked for 50 years, forces that have appeared together only once in the last 100 years, are all operating simultaneously right now. The last time they aligned like this was the 1930s. You know what followed. In the next 25 minutes, you will understand exactly what those 5 forces are, why they are accelerating, and the 3 specific moves that separate the people who survive this transition from the people who become its casualties. Because here is what Ray Dalio knows better than almost anyone alive. These cycles do not announce themselves loudly. They do not give second chances. And by the time most people realize what has happened, the window to act is already closed permanently. Let me tell you about a man named Thomas. Thomas was 53 years old, senior risk analyst at a major financial institution in London, 27 years in finance, running stress tests and modeling tail risks for a living. He understood markets better than most people ever would. His personal portfolio reflected that expertise. £1.6 million, built over nearly 3 decades of disciplined saving and careful allocation, UK equities, government gilts, some international diversification. His advisor called it textbook. His wife Sarah had a plan for what that money meant. A cottage in the Cotswolds bought outright when Thomas turned 58. Their son's university fees paid without debt. Retirement at 62, traveling the coast of Portugal they had talked about for 15 years. Thomas had read Dalio's framework. He understood the debt cycle theory. He could explain the big cycle at a dinner table. But he had a ready answer for every warning sign. The United Kingdom has centuries of institutional stability, he told his advisor. These kinds of collapses happen to countries with weak legal systems and thin capital markets, not to mature democracies. His advisor agreed completely. The fundamentals were sound. The numbers were manageable. The system was resilient. So Thomas stayed the course. He bought the second property in 2022. He increased equity exposure in 2023. He told Sarah the Portugal plan was on track. Then the data started arriving. In 2024, 16,000 millionaires left the United Kingdom in a single year, the largest private wealth exodus from any major developed nation on earth. People who had built fortunes as large as Thomas's, quietly, systematically moving everything out. Thomas read the articles. He followed the parliamentary debates. He listened to the official explanations about temporary factors and structural resilience. He still didn't move. By late 2025, gilt yields were rising under sustained pressure. Government programs millions depended on were being cut, not from ideology, but from arithmetic. The pound was under pressure that the official commentary kept describing as temporary. Thomas's portfolio had declined in real purchasing power terms. The second property had stalled in a market that had quietly stopped moving. His timeline for retirement had shifted from 62 to 65, then to 67. The Cotswolds cottage hasn't happened. Portugal is now something they talk about in the future, tense, loosely, without dates. He reached out at the end of last year, not for advice, just to say something. I understood everything you were describing, he said. I just couldn't make myself believe it was actually happening until it already had. His advisor retired last year at 58, lives outside Edinburgh now, plays golf 4 days a week. That is the most expensive sentence in personal finance. Don't let it become yours. To understand why Thomas missed what was directly in front of him, you need to understand the framework Ray Dalio has spent 50 years building. The economy is not random. It is not chaos. It is a machine that runs on predictable cycles, short cycles most people can see, and one long cycle that most people live and die without ever fully noticing. The short cycles last 5 to 8 years. Economies expand, debt accumulates, central banks tighten, growth slows, rates fall, growth returns. The recessions you have lived through, visible, uncomfortable, temporary, but underneath those short cycles runs a deeper mechanism, a cycle that lasts approximately 80 years, long enough that most people never experience two of them in a single lifetime. We are 80 years from 1945, 80 years from the 1945, 80 years from the last time the world order completely restructured itself. When the winners of the last great conflict sat down and rewrote the rules, which currency controls global trade, where the borders sit, which institutions govern international behavior. Dalio has identified 5 forces that drive this cycle toward its end. And right now, for the first time since the 1930s, all 5 are in motion simultaneously. The first force, debt and the money machine credit, is the engine of every modern economy. When governments can borrow cheaply and central banks can print freely, they do. Economies grow, wealth is created, but every dollar spent today through borrowing is a dollar that must be repaid tomorrow with interest. The United States is currently carrying a national debt of $38.5 trillion. In fiscal 2026, for the first time in modern American history, the federal government is spending more on interest payments for existing debt than on national defense. Think carefully about what that means. The country that spends more defending its borders than any nation on earth is now paying more to service its past borrowing than to protect its present security. The Congressional Budget Office projects annual interest payments will reach $2.1 trillion by 2036. Not the total debt, just the annual interest bill. Every year, when a nation reaches this point, the historical record offers only 3 exits. Default. Governments and institutions stop paying. Restructuring, creditors accept 50 cents on every dollar they were owed. Or inflation, printing enough currency to make the debt manageable in nominal terms while systematically destroying its real value. Dalio's research across 500 years is unambiguous about which option governments choose. Every single time, without exception, they print. They call it quantitative easing or stimulus or monetary accommodation, but the effect is always identical. The currency you hold buys less, slowly at first, then faster. And the savings you have accumulated over 30 disciplined years quietly lose their purchasing power while your bank statement shows the same number. The second force, the internal war, Ray Dalio, returns to one specific statistic repeatedly because he believes it may be the most important single data point in understanding where America stands today. 60% of Americans currently read below a 6th grade level. At the same time, approximately 3 million people in a country of 330 million are generating a disproportionate share of all new wealth. The founders and major shareholders of the AI companies, the semiconductor manufacturers, the platforms that run on the infrastructure of the modern digital economy, they are by every measure doing extraordinarily well. The gap between those 3 million and the 60% at the bottom is not simply economic inequality, it is civilizational fragmentation. 2 populations living in entirely different economic realities with entirely different assessments of whether the system is working. What history shows happens when wealth gaps reach this level is predictable. People stop trusting the system, not because they are irrational, because they are correct. The system is no longer delivering for them. They stop following its rules. They search for anyone who promises to tear it down and rebuild it in their favor. In the 1930s, 4 established democracies made exactly this choice: Italy, Germany, Spain, and Japan. All 4 transitioned to autocratic governance, not through sudden violent revolution, but through the slow erosion of institutional trust, followed by the democratic choice of leaders who then dismantled the institutions that elected them. This is not a prediction. It is a historical constant that Dalio has documented across every major civilization he has studied. The third force, the great powers collision. 80 years ago, there were 2 superpowers. The certainty of mutual nuclear destruction kept a cold, unstable peace for 5 decades. The Soviet Union collapsed. The United States became the world's sole dominant power. For 30 years, that was the operating assumption of every international institution, every treaty, every trade relationship. That assumption is now gone. Dalio watches the same public images the rest of the world sees. The open meetings and walking ceremonies between Xi, Putin, Modi, and their aligned nations. He understands what this means because he has watched this alignment pattern occur before. In the 1930s, in the decades before the First World War, every time a rising power challenges an established one for control of the world order, the United States and China are now engaged in what Dalio calls the technology war. Semiconductors, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, space infrastructure, every frontier of 21st century power contested at the same time. His view on this is direct. The nation that wins the technology war wins all wars. Economic dominance, military dominance. The ability to set the rules for the next world order. Nuclear technology determined the outcome of the Second World War. The technology dominant at the close of the cycle will define the next 80 years. The United Kingdom, in Dalio's assessment, is not meaningfully in this competition. It does not have the capital markets, the talent density, or the entrepreneurial culture to compete at the scale the technology war requires. It has been declining as a global financial and innovation center since 1945. Not catastrophically, not visibly from year to year, but consistently and measurably across the arc of the cycle. The fourth force, acts of nature across the 500 years Dalio has studied. Pandemics, droughts, floods, and natural catastrophes have killed more people than all wars combined. They do not arrive in isolation. They arrive in the middle of everything else, and they pour fuel on every fire already burning. COVID alone added more to global debt in 2 years than the entire preceding decade. It forced governments to print at a scale that would have been politically unthinkable in any normal period. It widened the wealth gap between the 3 million who owned the digital economy and the 60% who didn't. It strained institutions already under pressure from internal conflict and geopolitical tension. It didn't create the forces. It accelerated every single one of them simultaneously. Dalio does not predict the specific form of the next catastrophe. He doesn't need to. What he observes is this. A system already overstressed across 4 dimensions is exponentially more fragile than a healthy one. The next act of nature, whatever form it takes, arrives into that environment, not into the stable world of 2005, into stage 6 of an 80-year debt cycle. The question is not whether it will happen. The question is whether you are positioned on the right side of it when it does. The fifth force, technology and the new divide, artificial intelligence and humanoid robotics, are not only the subject of the geopolitical technology war between the United States and China, they're also a domestic restructuring force operating faster than any institution, government, or education system is equipped to process. Consider what Dalio actually means when he talks about this. A humanoid robot, programmable, tireless, with the equivalent of a PhD in every subject simultaneously, changes the economic calculation not just for factory workers, but for lawyers, accountants, radiologists, financial analysts, and software engineers. The routine cognitive work that built the professional middle class of the 20th century becomes automatable at a pace without historical precedent. The productivity gains from this are real and enormous, but they flow almost entirely to the people who own the technology, to the 3 million already doing extraordinarily well. For the 60% reading at a 6th grade level, this is not a productivity revolution. It is competition from systems that do not sleep, do not ask for raises, and improve every 6 months. This returns us directly to force 2. The wealth gap was already at dangerous levels. The technology wave does not narrow it. It widens it faster at a moment when the system has the least capacity to absorb the pressure. Now let me tell you about Claire. Claire was 46 years old. Project manager at a London consultancy. £190,000 saved over 17 years. Nothing extraordinary, just the accumulated result of consistent work and spending less than she earned. She had a specific image of what that money was for. Her daughter Mia starting university without the debt that had followed Claire through her own 20s. A flat bought outright eventually with no mortgage. The freedom by 55 to choose her work rather than needed. She came across Dalio's framework in late 2023. She studied it seriously, not casually, but the way she approached every project that mattered. She understood the five forces. She traced the historical patterns. She sat with the discomfort of what it implied, and she asked the question Thomas had never thought to ask. What can someone in my position actually do about this? Dalio returns repeatedly to a Chinese proverb he considers one of the most practically important ideas in personal financial strategy. A smart rabbit has three holes, not one escape route. Three, you don't know which predator is coming, from which direction or when. A rabbit with one hole is prey. A rabbit with three holes survives. Claire wasn't wealthy. She couldn't restructure international capital flows. But she had 18 months, a transferable skill set, and the willingness to build three holes before she needed any of them. Hole one, geographic optionality. Her grandmother was Irish. That qualified her for EU citizenship, a process she began in January 2024. Not because she planned to leave, because she was building the ability to leave as circumstances required it. She mapped her professional options the same month. 15 years of digital transformation project management. Remote capable, geography independent, in demand across multiple markets. She began building relationships in Singapore, the UAE, and Canada, economies running surpluses rather than deficits, lower debt trajectories, less exposure to the great powers conflict at the center of the cycle. She did not buy a second property. She understood what Dalio's framework says about that choice. A home carrying a mortgage in a single country is not an asset that gives you options. It is a fixed position in a specific jurisdiction. You don't have three holes, you have one nailed to the ground. Hole two, financial architecture across systems. Claire spent 6 months quietly restructuring her savings. She moved a portion out of UK-denominated assets entirely, not into speculation, but into economies running surpluses rather than deficits, with lower debt trajectories and less direct exposure to the great powers conflict she had been studying. She bought physical gold, not a fund, not a stock, metal with her name on it, stored outside the UK banking system. She kept a meaningful portion completely liquid, not for the yield, but for the optionality. The ability to act when the crisis created the opportunity it always creates for those who are prepared. She did not touch the rest. She did not try to be clever. She simply stocked, having everything in one place, denominated in one currency, dependent on one country's debt cycle resolving itself successfully. By month 6, nothing in her life looked different from the outside, but her exposure had changed completely. Hole 3, knowledge and adaptable skills. This is the hole most people forget. It may be the one that matters most. Claire spent the second half of 2024 developing AI-augmented project management skills, not replacing her judgment with automation, but learning to direct it, to catch what it misses, to apply the contextual human intelligence that the machine cannot replicate. Dalio's research on technology is direct. In a world where routine cognitive work automates at accelerating speed, the premium shifts to skills requiring judgment under ambiguity, trust across relationships, and complex decision-making that resists automation. These capabilities travel across borders. They compound with experience. They do not lose purchasing power when a currency devalues. By early 2025, Claire had 3 holes. Mia's university fund was intact and diversified. The flat she wanted was still a plan, but a plan with options behind it rather than a single fragile outcome. She called 2 months ago. She said something that stayed with me. I didn't do anything dramatic. I just stopped having only one answer to every risk. That is the smart rabbit. What you do now, not eventually, not after the next earnings report, not when the signal becomes obvious to everyone else. This week, Ray Dalio's framework is not designed for people who are already in crisis. It is designed for the period just before the crisis becomes undeniable. The window when action is still possible and options still exist. That window is open right now. It will not stay open indefinitely. Here is the specific sequence. This week, sit down with your complete financial picture. Every account, every allocation, every assumption. For each position, ask one question honestly. If the debt cycle accelerates sharply, over the next 18 months. Does this survive in real purchasing power terms? Mark everything that cannot answer yes. Month 1, research your geographic optionality, ancestry, citizenship, remote capable professional skills, relationships outside your home country. You are not planning to leave, you are building the ability to leave if circumstances require it. Separately, open an allocated gold account. Bullion Vault takes 40 minutes online. Start with 5% of your liquid savings in physical metal outside the banking system. Month 2, move 15 to 20% of your savings out of home country concentrated assets and into internationally diversified positions, economies running surpluses rather than deficits, with lower debt trajectories and less direct exposure to the great powers conflict. Open a money market account for your liquid reserve. This is your ammunition, deployable capital for when the crisis creates the opportunity and always does for those who are prepared. Month 3, audit your skills with the same honesty you apply to your portfolio. Which of your capabilities transfer geographically, which are vulnerable to automation in the world Dalio describes? What specific expertise would make you more valuable in that world rather than more exposed to it? Start building toward that deliberately, not eventually. Month 4 onward, review. Adjust. The goal is not a perfect allocation on day 1. The goal is a fundamentally different architecture. 3 holes instead of 1, designed for the cycle that is operating, not the one that is ended. Pain plus reflection equals progress. That principle guided Dalio from a 12-year-old taking his caddying money to the stock market to building the world's largest hedge fund managing $150 billion. Not brilliance, not luck. The disciplined willingness to sit with honest self-assessment and act on what it reveals. Before the window closes, most people watching this will agree with everything they just heard, and then they will do nothing, because action is harder than agreement, because their advisor will say the fundamentals are sound, because it is easier to hope the window stays open than to act while it still is. Thomas agreed with the theory too. His advisor retired at 58, lives outside Edinburgh now, plays golf 4 days a week. Thomas is still working. Not because he loves his job, because Portugal needs more time now, and the cycle is not giving it to him. Stage 6 does not wait for you to finish thinking about it. Build your 3 holes. Build them now.